Hello, I'm Ros Atkins, and on today's World Have Your Say, we're going to talk about Greece. Because the Greeks have been told if they pass austerity measures next week, they are going to get another bailout. This time it's to the tune of $170 billion, with the money coming from the IMF and from eurozone countries, all of which has prompted a huge discussion about whether this is really the best remedy for the Greek sovereign debt crisis. Well, over the next hour, we'll endeavour to speak to some of you in all 17 of the eurozone countries. If you want to tweet us as you're watching, use the hashtag WHYS. And if you're outside of the region, tell us, does this feel relevant to you and your country's financial well-being? As ever, we're live, and you're very welcome to take part. Well, in a moment, we're going to be speaking live to some of you in Germany, Greece and in Belgium. And that hashtag throughout the programme is WHYS. We're also at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. First, though, let's have a look at all the day's main stories aside from that Greek bailout. We're going to begin with this guilty verdict for Pauline Nyiramaasuhuku. She's a former Rwandan government minister and has become the first woman to be found guilty of genocide by an international court. Now, she was Minister for Women and Family when the crimes were committed. The tribunal for Rwanda was told that she helped to plan the genocide and organise the rape of women and girls. Her son was also convicted of genocide. EU leaders have given Croatia the green light to become the European Union's newest member. The draft conclusion of today's EU summit says talks on Croatia's membership should be concluded this month and the accession treaty should be signed by December. Now, the parliaments of all 27 members will then have to ratify the document, a process expected to last until June 2013. The former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Tymoshenko, has denounced her trial for abuse of power as a kangaroo court. Speaking at the opening of proceedings in Kiev, Ms. Tymoshenko said the judge was a puppet of her arch-rival President Viktor Yanukovych, whom she described as a coward who feared political opposition. Ms. Tymoshenko is accused of exceeding her authority by signing a gas contract with Russia in 2009 after Moscow had briefly cut supplies. Doctors in France are dealing with a second outbreak of the illness caused by E. coli in 2 weeks. 7 people are in hospital in Bordeaux a week after a similar outbreak in Lille, which is more than 800 kilometres to the north. The French health authorities say the food poisoning appears to be caused by different strains of the bacteria. They have not been able to establish the source of either infection. Well, let me introduce you to our guest. Live from Berlin, we have Julius van der Laar. He's a political consultant and a regular contributor to the programme. Thanks for joining us, Julius. We appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
Mark is with us from Austria. He's got in touch. Mark, thanks for joining us. Let's hope Mark can hear us. And Guy Verhofstadt is a former Belgian Prime Minister, now the leader of the Liberals and Democrats in the European Parliament. He's live from the BBC's office in Brussels. And Guy, we invited you onto the programme because you've written an article lots of our viewers have been looking at, arguing that this crisis may make Europe stronger and the euro stronger. Just explain that to us.
Well, I think that this crisis is not only a crisis about Greece, but it's mainly a crisis about the capability of the European Union to create a real economic union. And it's not, I should say, old-style federalist was saying that. No, mainly Mr. Lipsky, the head of the International Monetary Fund, and Mr. Geithner, the Minister of Finance of the US, have said 2 days ago that Europeans now have to establish this political and economic union if they overcome this crisis.
Julius, do you agree with that?
I think there are a number of issues here, and this has been we've been discussing this for several times now. the main point is, how do we go forward here? And I think it's clear that there's going to be a bailout and that the European community is going to stand up and provide necessary funds to the Greek people. And obviously the Greek people have to do their share of making sure that they change their systems and become more responsible with their spending. But the question that's at stake here, I think, is not just a Greek crisis. I think it's a European crisis. And my question is, how do we go forward with that? And how do we reestablish a European identity?
Guy, do you agree we're in the middle of a European crisis?
Well, I think it's mainly a crisis about Europe. We are at a crossroad now for the moment. Shall we become a loose confederation of nation states, what I call a UN of Europe? Or shall we further go on the path of a US of Europe, a United States of Europe, a real federal entity as we have at the other side of the Atlantic? That's the crossroad where we are on for the moment.
You say that Europe's at a crossroads. Mark, in Austria, which turn should it take now?
Yes, this is an interesting question because I think for me it's not just a European challenge. I think it's a global challenge. I think there are many forces that have caused these problems which are not just unique to Europe. This is a global financial situation. Just so happens that smaller economies within Europe are affected the most. And I think choices and decisions that Greece itself has made is a problem. Now, in terms of, I agree that maybe we should start looking at a true federal system. I think myself being an expat from the United States, living in Europe, I'm constantly juxtaposed between this identity of what is the European Union and myself as being raised in the States. And I feel a federal system is more suited to the structure of Europe.
Mark, thanks for those comments. And just to explain, put simply, the options facing Europe are these. You either go for convergence, where you try and make all economies within the EU zone very similar. You can go for fiscal unity, which is where the eurozone takes control of fiscal policy in each of those countries. Or you've got the option of breaking up and saying to Greece and other countries, if you don't fit into the euro, then you've got to shift out and go back to your old currencies. Those are the three options facing the eurozone. What we're discussing today is which one appeals to you. Let's pull up this message from Dino in South Africa on Facebook saying, giving Greece more loans is only going to kick the can down the road longer. The truth is that Greece is bankrupt. Unless huge amounts of Greek debt are forgiven, Greece is going to default sooner rather than later. Well, let's get all of you to respond to that, starting with Julius in Berlin. Do you agree with that analysis?
First of all, you just laid out the options, and I think we've tried the approach of taking it a financial union, and clearly that hasn't worked. Look, for the last 20 years, we've all, especially the wealthy countries, and obviously I'm here in Germany, we've benefited greatly from this, and we've been able to export our goods all over Europe, and the smaller countries in Europe, such as Greece, haven't been able to get their fair share out of it. So the question of making this just financial union doesn't work. I think we have to ask a different question, and whether it's a European question of aspirations, something that's greater than just the individual states, but something that's more important than just money, currency, or economy. But we have to somehow unify around ideals and common interests, not just financial interests, because clearly this is the way we're doing it right now isn't working.
But Guy, is that actually what Europeans want?
I think yes. I think that the only good way forward is a political and economic union. Because that's also the best way to create wealth in the European Union. And it is not necessary for that to harmonize everything inside the European Union. What we need is a policy of convergence, where the different economies of the European Union are following the same path. So can I make a comparison? Look to what is happening in California and to what is happening in Greece. In California, people, the state has no even money to pay their civil servants. But nevertheless, there is no pressure on the dollar. And a small economy like Greece is putting pressure on the whole European Union and on the euro. The difference between the US and Europe is that they have a political and economic union behind the US, and we don't have it. So California is no problem, and Greece is a big problem. And the only way forward is to create this political and economic union in Europe.
Mark, in Austria, I'm sure you'll want to pick up here.
The question was whether if Greece will eventually default, what would be the option for Greece? And I think, in some ways, I think Greece should default, and so that it would send a message to the world that the euro, the currency, is serious. And if this is a serious financial project, and then we show that one country that's not holding its fair share within this union, economic union, there must be a default.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us from Austria. And if you're watching and thinking, I'd like to take part just as Mark has, if you email worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com, give us your Skype details and we'll do our very best to get as many of you onto the programme. Or if you'd just like to phone up and take part, the number to call is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Now, we've said goodbye to Mark in Austria. Let's bring in Sean O'Grady, economics editor for the independent newspaper in the UK. Sean, thank you very much indeed for your time today. You wrote a piece which had the headline, "Greek rage will remind many of a spoilt child's tantrums." Just explain that one to us.
Well, I think a lot of people in Northern Europe who've done their time, so to speak, they've had a lot of austerity over the years, they've made their economies competitive, especially in Germany. They look on what happens in Greece, what's been happening in Greece over the last few years with astonishment, frankly. You know, this is a country that didn't collect its taxes because it was far too easy to borrow money at German cheap interest rates on the world's markets. That's how it financed its state. People used to take early retirement at 50, state workers. They're still on a 37.5-hour week. These are pretty much unheard of luxuries across most of Europe. Greece was not a very heavily taxed country. It had very, very high social benefits, and frankly, the Greeks were living some way beyond their means over the last few years, partly because they were able to borrow, as I say, because they joined the euro. Now, that is no longer an option for them. They have to adjust their economy, and it is going to be very, very painful for them in living standards, no matter what happens. But they have to come to terms with the fact that they've got 10 years of unpaid taxes, pretty much, that they've now got to try and find. And that's why it's you know, it feels painful for them, but compared to properly run nations, it shouldn't be that painful at all.
Julius, Guy, let's bring you in. Maybe Guy first in Brussels.
Yes, I think that those are all very good arguments that I hear to create an economic union inside the eurozone. Because let's be very honest, you can have a monetary union, but without an economic union that cannot work in the future. That said, I think that enormous reforms, savings are necessary in Greece. But that is not enough, not sufficient enough. I don't think that we can solve the Greek crisis if at the same time, next to a fiscal consolidation program, we have also a program, a plan for growth and jobs
now,
in,
Guy, you're
in,
talking
in
about,
Greece.
Let me interrupt you here, I apologise, but you're talking about plans for the future, but don't you think that Sean has a point that first things first, the eurozone should acknowledge a huge mistake was made when Greece joined in 2002. It started borrowing money at very cheap rates, public spending went through the roof, salaries in the public sector in Greece have almost doubled since it joined the euro. Julius in Berlin, wasn't that a fundamental error by the German government and other powerful governments within the eurozone?
Look, if you look at our exports, especially over here in Germany, I don't think it was an error at all. We've been able to sell our goods all over Europe, and we've been able to lend our money and do pretty well with it. So from an economic perspective, I think we've done pretty well. The question is, was that a strategic view, and is it now, are we now getting the bill for that? But you mentioned something about Europe and how we proceed forward. And the question, you know, I listened to Angela Merkel, German Chancellor, speak on Wednesday, and she mentioned that, you know, going forward, and the key learning from this is that in the eurozone, we have to be able to make the decision of kicking a single country out of the eurozone. And I wonder what kind of question or what kind of message this is sending to especially smaller countries who are not able to pay their debt. And again, this is a question of, is this just an economic union, or is it a more than just a kind of economic union? And this is a union that we identify with. And if you put out the message that, you know, you're happy to kick someone out of the eurozone if they're not able to pay up and not put the structures in place to make sure that everyone has the potential to stay in it, I think that's a fundamental difference.
And Guy, I can hear you wanting to pick up on that point. I'm sure Sean does as well.
Because I think
if I could just ask you to hold that thought, we're going to take a break for a couple of minutes, and then I promise I will come straight back to you and continue right where we've left off. Hello, this is Ros Atkins with you on World Have Your Say. We're talking about this proposed second bailout for Greece. It will go ahead if the Greek parliament passes a new raft of austerity measures, a 5-year plan involving cuts going up into millions and millions of euros. This new bailout will be $170 billion. The current bailout, brought in May 2010, was $156 billion. So that on its own hasn't done the trick. And just before the news, we were talking with Julius in Berlin, who's left us for the moment, but also with Guy Verhofstadt, former Belgian Prime Minister, now leader of the Liberals and Democrats in the European Parliament, and Sean O'Grady from The Independent. We were talking about whether the eurozone should acknowledge a catastrophic error in the way that it handled Greece's entry into the euro in 2002. Guy, you wanted to make a point. I had to interrupt you. I'm sorry for doing that. Please do go ahead.
No, I don't think that the error was made from the beginning, because in the beginning we asked the Greek political parties to do a number of reforms, and it's true they didn't do a number of reforms in the last decades. But the main error, the fatal error, has been done, in my opinion, by Angela Merkel in December 2009, by the start of the Greek crisis, when she said, "Okay, the Greeks have to solve the problems themselves, and if necessary, we push them out the system." And that has created to the financial markets an enormous bad message, the message that this club, this Euro club, is not a real team, not a unity, but that countries can be pushed out like that based on one or other decision by the biggest country of the team. And that was a fatal mistake from the beginning, I think.
Can we butt in?
Of course you can, Sean.
Well, I think that what Angela Merkel was doing was giving the game away. She wasn't necessarily destroying things. In Germany, they have a big choice now. They can either have their European project, they can have their European dream, they can have the euro single currency carrying on, provided they adopt Greece's debts. This is what the Italian finance minister Tremonti and the leader of the eurozone group of ministers, Jean-Claude Juncker from Luxembourg, want. They want the Germans to take responsibility to stand by Greek debts and all the other countries' debts. And if they do that, the Germans will have to pay higher interest rates in future, and they'll probably have to have more fiscal transfers, more gifts, effectively, of financial aid to Greece to have a full fiscal and monetary union that really works, as you would in fact in the United States of Europe, in a country. Now they can have that, or they can have German economic strength and financial discipline, which they've always put a huge premium on since the Second World War. But they cannot have it both ways. And what Angela Merkel seemed to be saying, which is reflecting what the German taxpayer must feel, is they want their financial stability. They gave up the Deutschmark 10 plus years ago, which was a huge sacrifice for the German nation and the German people. They were given guarantees about what nations would and wouldn't be allowed to do in the way of borrowing. All of them been broken, partly because of the financial crisis, but also as a matter of habit by some of these countries that have become indebted. And I was very taken, last point, by what Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, said today, which was the problem is not one of liquidity. It's not short-term lack of funds. It's a solvency issue, that these countries are not able to pay their debt structurally. The debts are just too big, and that's the problem. And either somebody has to come in and pay the debts for them, or they have to reduce their debts somehow by telling that to people, or you have to find some other fundamental answer.
And
but,
Sean, let me jump in here.
Issue.
Let me jump in here, because you're talking about people taking responsibility. Angela Merkel's been telling the Greek opposition to fulfill its historic responsibilities, talking about the possibility of the Greek opposition sabotaging these austerity measures. Bear in mind that in the past, this Greek opposition has been opposed to the measures that have already been brought in. Let's speak to Astris, who's a blogger with Global Voices Online, and he joins us live from Thessaloniki in Greece. Astris, do you urge the opposition to agree to these austerity measures?
Do I urge the opposition? It's really not their own initiative to agree or disagree, because the people have their own ideas about this whole crisis. I mean, they feel they are not represented. They feel they've been dispossessed from the whole political process. They're not stakeholders, so they aren't given a say. These waves of protest you're seeing, the peaceful protests in the squares from Spain all the way to Belarus even, are manifestations of the same base feelings, that the people feel dispossessed. from all the parties, especially in Greece. They feel this, especially from the two major parties, have been handing off power one to the other over the years.
Astris, let me pick up on that point, because Sean O'Grady, you've been critical of how the Greeks have responded, but what about Astris's point that people don't feel that they have a stake in what's happening? They feel they're being cut out of it.
Well, there's a lot of nonsense talked about bankers and alienation and all the rioting and so forth. The point is, as I say, that unfortunately Greece is not the most competitive economy. In the eurozone, it finds it very hard to keep up in a single currency area. So would Britain, to that extent. We stayed out of it for that reason. Now, it's going to be the case, whatever happens in Greece, whether they have a socialist revolution, they have another kind of revolution, if they leave the euro, if they don't leave the euro, their living standards will fall, because they cannot live beyond their means indefinitely. They cannot service the debt that they've run up during the good years because it is too large, even maybe with the austerity packages, frankly. And it may be the case that Greece will have to do all of these things. It will have to default on its debts, it will have to leave the eurozone eventually, maybe not as an emergency, and it will have to have austerity packages built in for a long time to come, and it will be very, very tough on Greece. Europe can help. Europe can send aid down there, as it had when Greece joined the European Union, to improve its infrastructure and raise its rate of economic growth. But competitiveness is absolutely crucial, and that can't be done quickly anyway.
It's worth mentioning the European Council President has been saying that technical assistance, structural assistance will be given to the Greeks to help develop their economy. Astris, thanks for speaking to us from Thessaloniki. Let's bring in Georgia, who's also in Greece. Georgia, tell us exactly where you are and if you want the opposition to support the austerity measures.
Well, what I would like would be to see from any of our political parties and governments in power here to see some competence, to see some ethics built.
Georgia, it sounds like your line's just cut up a bit there, which is a real shame. Thank you very much indeed. Well, in the meantime, while we're sorting that out, let's bring in Mahfouz from the World Have Your Say team. He's where the whole team's taking your calls as you watch us live. Mahfouz, what have you been hearing?
Just in the last few minutes, there have been callers from Syria, Ghana, Nigeria, comments from New Zealand, Rwanda, Portugal. Most are discussing whether it's Europe's responsibility at all to bail out the troubled Greek economy. Some are saying Greece is in the euro. Europe must help. There has been a lot of conversation online as well. Kia commented on Facebook, Greece should go back to the drachma and be allowed to devalue. Getting more loans to pay off old loans is just ridiculous. And as always, you can join the conversation right now using the hashtag WHYS, which you can see in the screen now.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mahfouz. Let's go back to Georgia in Greece. Hopefully we can hear you a little clearer. Georgia, you were explaining whether you would support these austerity measures or not.
The austerity measures to date in Greece have been crippling to Greece's people, and we really must separate Greece's politicians, the huge bureaucracy, the unions, from the people, the underdogs that are being affected by this austerity.
And once again, that line is packed up. That's a real shame. Thank you very much indeed. Sean, I just wonder, are you convinced that the Greeks are capable of changing their working culture?
They are capable of doing that. They are making sacrifices. There are austerity programs going on. But this will be a long, long haul to get them up to North European, German levels of productivity. It will take years and years, if not decades, for that to happen. And it will be a very, very long and hard slog. And they will have to have some help along the way.
And in the next half an hour, I'd be interested to talk about some comments we received suggesting the Western media is involved in a witch hunt against Greeks. We'll talk about that and lots more here on World Have Your Say. Do keep staying in touch. If it passes further austerity and on today's World Have Your Say, we're talking about the last one came in around $156 billion. This time it will be for another bailout. The last one came in around $156 billion. This time it will be nearer the $170 billion mark. All that money is going to the IMF and eurozone countries, which begs the very pressing question: does this feel fair and should others have to help Greece again? If you're watching within the eurozone, does this feel fair and necessary to you? And if you're outside of it, does the crisis feel relevant to you? Pick up as many of your messages and we're live, and if you're tweeting as you watch, use the WHYS hashtag. We'll pick up as many of your messages and put them on the screen. We'll do that as much as we can over the next half an hour. a moment, we're going to be speaking to guests in Ireland, Germany and Belgium. Of course, wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to take part. Okay, in a moment, we're going to be speaking to guests in Ireland, Germany and Belgium. Of course, wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to take part as well. The hashtag is again, WHYS. Aside from the Greek bailout, let's look at the other main news of the day. The former Rwandan government minister has become the first bailout. Let's look at the other main news of the day. The former Rwandan government minister has become the first woman to be found guilty of genocide by an international court. International Criminal Tribunal was minister for the family and women when the crimes were committed. International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was told that she helped to plan the genocide and organise the rape of women. Croatia the green light to become the European Union's newest member. The draft conclusion EU leaders have given Croatia the green light to become the European Union's newest member this month. The draft conclusion of today's EU summit says talks on Croatia's membership should be concluded this month, and the accession treaty will be signed in December. Now, the parliaments of all 27 members will also have to ratify the document. The former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Tymoshenko, has denounced her trial for abuse of power. The former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Tymoshenko, has denounced her trial for abuse of power. As a kangaroo court. Speaking at the opening of proceedings in Kiev, Ms. Tymoshenko said the judge was a puppet of her arch-rival President Tymoshenko is accused of exceeding her authority by signing a gas contract with Russia in 2009. Ms. Tymoshenko is accused of exceeding her authority by signing a gas contract with Russia in 2009 after Moscow had briefly by E. coli in 2 weeks. Doctors in France are dealing with a second outbreak of illness caused by E. coli in 2 weeks, which is more than 800 kilometres in Bordeaux. And this is a week after a similar outbreak in Lille, which is more than 800 kilometres north of the bacteria. The French health authorities say the food poisoning appears to be caused by different strains of the bacteria. They have not been able to establish the source of either infection. Well, let me introduce you to our first 3 guests. In Berlin, we have Julius van der Laar, a political consultant and regular contributor to World 3 guests. In Berlin, we have Julius van der Laar, a political consultant and regular contributor to radio station. And live with Ireland, we have Sarah Carey, a broadcaster with Ireland's News Talk radio station. And live with us, the Liberals and Democrats in the European Parliament. A warm welcome to Belgian Prime Minister, now leader of the Liberals and Democrats in the European Parliament. Maybe we should make things a little more short-term. We've been talking about long-term issues for the eurozone. Maybe we should make things Greece, whether it's expensive or not. You actually have confidence. Is a bailout simply going to fix Greece, whether it's expensive or not?
Feeling in Ireland, and it's certainly one I share, that all we're doing at the moment is kicking this proverbial can further down the road. That all we're doing at the moment is kicking this proverbial can further down the road. But nevertheless, Irish people have been told by commentators in 2013 there will be a default, a managed default, in 2013 proper restructuring between the PIGS countries as they're known, and in the meantime we all just have to behave and meet our targets countries as they're known, and in the meantime we all just have to behave the French and German deadlines, actually be able to absorb a restructuring of debt. At the moment it's just not possible, so we all have to absorb a restructuring of debt. At the moment it's just not possible, so we all have to knuckle down.
You're not convinced. I'm looking at loss of 400,000 jobs since the first austerity measures were introduced in Greece. There's been a loss of 400,000 jobs money in, and industrial production in austerity measures is necessarily going to fix the problem. That pumping more money in and bringing in austerity measures is necessarily going to fix the problem.
And that is absolutely necessary. I agree with you, but it's not enough.
Austerity is one element,
not a one-track approach,
that is absolutely
necessary.
And a two-track approach means that
next to you need not a one-track approach, but a
fiscal consolidation program.
And a two-track approach means
you need
that
also
next to
a program of investment
fiscal
of
consolidation
program
for Greece,
and that is
also
also
a task for the European Union
of investments
of growth
is,
for
example,
and that is also
we
a task for the European Union.
Loans of the European Investment Bank
is, for example,
guarantees of the European
we
Union,
should use
and mainly also
loans
a
of
part
the European
of the
privatization program,
guarantees of the
to
European
finance
Union,
a private
and mainly
investment
also a part
of the privatization
because
program,
I don't think that Greece can recover
private investment
if next to a fiscal consolidation program we have Greece can recover and can solve its problems. If next to a fiscal consolidation program we have not also a plan
I think it's clear that you can't
boost
just throw
private
money at the
investment.
problem. We've been trying that, and it's clearly not working. At the same time, it's clear that we can't just throw money at the problem. We've been trying that and it's clearly not measures. At the same time, we need to empower the people. Our finance minister just came out and said, one thing I want to pick up on that I just read in the German news, our finance minister came out and said, in Greece, there's beautiful weather. I think we need to look at a new system, a new structure over there in Greece to make sure that government employees are not getting 18-month benefits. A new system, a new structure over there in Greece. At the same time, you can't just increase the gas taxes and the VAT to 23%. And at the same time, you can't just increase the gas taxes and the VAT to 23%. Because clearly, I think it has to be a combination of both. Greek people just throwing money at the problem is not the solution. But at the same time, you need a combination of people in Greece. Clearly, just throwing money at the problem maybe with some private. At the same time, you need to empower to get the economy moving again.
But Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. What Julius and Guy are describing is what's supposed to be happening in Ireland. But Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. What Julius and Guy are describing is what's supposed to be happening in Ireland. So are you having a positive experience of that? You're getting the bailout. You're also getting the investment.
At the moment, the reports that we've been getting on our austerity measures say that so far it's working. At the moment, the reports that we've been getting on our austerity measures say that so far it's working. Other bailout governments meeting our public spending target cuts, in that sense we compare quite well to Greece. Bailout governments Ireland is this double economy. In that sense we compare quite well to Greece. We have great exports figures just double there in the last 48 hours that show our exports are increasing. We have great export figures just came out there in the last 48 hours that show our exports are increasing. But domestically, domestic economy and services and retail is dragging down that export. The domestic economy and services and retail is dragging down that export. There is no money for investment and there is no money for consumers to spend and give the domestic economy there is no money for investment and there is no money for consumers to spend and give the domestic economy a boost. And our finance minister Mark Carney was actually just yesterday asking people, so it's that effect, off the cuts that it actually dampens or delays or want to. So it's that effect, off the cuts that it actually dampens or delays or recovery.
Do you feel that all the uncertainty around your economy is discouraging you from spending the money in Greece? Do you feel that all the uncertainty around your economy is discouraging you from spending the money that you have? If you want to call us up, by all means do. We'll call you back and say we're getting calls from New Zealand, Rwanda, Syria, Belgium. We'll try and get some more of you on the air 72 in a moment. Say we're getting calls from New Zealand, Rwanda, Syria, Belgium. We'll try and get some more of you on the air in a moment. Mazakan's just tweeted using the WHOS hashtag to say, wouldn't it be much better to spend this money on protecting exposures and letting the Greeks rebalance? So that's one idea. Here's a comment from Scott in London. He's posted on Facebook. If the EU bails out Greece, it's like taking £12 billion and throwing money down the drain. It would be easier to declare the country bankrupt, then all debt would be cleared. It would take years to recover. What about that idea? But a clean slate is desperately needed. Lots of our viewers are suggesting that. What about that idea? You just clean the slate.
I think that next to this two-track approach that we have discussed a few moments ago, I think that next to this two-track approach that we have discussed a few moments ago, we need naturally also to lower the interest rate that we are asking. The effort by the member states that to lower the interest rate that we are asking on the loans that we are giving Greece. You have to know that, where, for example, we are asking 5% on the loans that we are giving now 5% to Greece. So, for example, the International Monetary Fund is only asking 3.5%. And then I come to your question. We have to do an effort there. And then finally, last point, and then I come to your question. I think the best thing to do is to eliminate as fast as possible. And what could be this bad rated? I think the best thing to do is to eliminate as fast as possible all these bad rated, for example, 100 of the financial markets, and to do a swap them, for example, 160 of Greek AAA rated euro swap them in, for example, 60 clean up the situation, clean up the financial euro of this. That should clean up the situation, clean up the financial markets. So efforts from everybody, efforts from the Greeks, efforts from the member states of the eurozone, and then also an effort by the from everybody, efforts from the Greeks, efforts from the member states of the eurozone, and then also an effort by the bond holders. Otherwise, no structural solution is possible.
I suppose the issue here, and I wonder if those of you in the eurozone criticism
wondering this is
about
whether
the
Greeks
are making the effort. We'll get onto that in a moment. We've heard a lot of criticism about the amount of tax that Greeks pay. We'll get onto that in a moment. More of your calls coming in from Malawi, Senegal, Australia, Michael in Syria, Spain and Iran. Thank you very much for getting in touch. We'll get as many of you on the air as we can. Michael in Syria says all member states signed the treaty. Greece is a paradise to it. And Teacher Dude in Greece tweeted us using the WHYS hashtag. Greece is a paradise for those who are on social benefits, he says. Now let's bring in Jerome. I'm seeing he's a Dutch blogger who joins us on Skype here from California. Hi Jerome, I'm seeing one responding to Dutch columnist Ingeborg Burgel here. Do you think that's true? Calling the way the Dutch are responding to the Greeks as a witch hunt.
I think we have to look at not just the Dutch press, but sort of the European press in general. There's a certain truth to it. We can have a look, for example, at the German tabloid Bild, not just the Dutch press, which last year the European press in general and its front page. Have a look, for example, at the statue of Venus, holding out middle finger, famous cover on its front page. Traders of the Euro statue of Venus, traders of the Euro middle finger with the Telegraaf, which is one of the main tabloids in the Netherlands, the traders of the Euro family in the country. And had a headline, which is one of the main tabloids in the Netherlands, saying the largest newspaper our citizens are no longer willing to pay for these last month, saying our citizens are no longer willing to pay for these this spendthrift sort of narrative is very malicious. It portrays a certain image of the Greek people that is not necessarily just, that is very malicious. It portrays a certain image of the Greek people that is not necessarily just, that is not factually correct, Greek laziness, and that creates an image of this crisis. I think this is caused by Greek profligacy.
Thank you very much for your contributions, Jerome. Do come back on to World Have Your Say. Let's switch from California to the World Have Your Say news desk. Jerome, do come back on to World Have Your Say. Let's switch from California to the World Have Your Say news desk. Mahfouz is back with us. What more is coming on the phones, Mahfouz?
Quite a few of you are saying the Greeks need to pay themselves for their troubles. Senegal, Australia, Pakistan. Substantially, all Greece needs to do is to persuade her people to pay tax. Not more tax, substantially, all Greece needs to do is to persuade her people to pay tax. Malaysia, not more tax, just actually impossible to rescue a country from an economic crash. When its people are busy protesting instead of working harder. It's impossible to rescue a country from an economic crash when its people are busy protesting instead of working harder. And as always, you can join the conversation using the hashtag that you see on the screen now, WHYS.
Mainly not paying enough tax is one of the issues we'll talk about whether this taxation issue, mainly not paying enough tax, is one of the issues which Greeks need to address. Do stay with us. Hi, I'm Ross Atkins. Thanks for continuing to join me here on the BBC's World Have Your Say. We're talking about this proposed Greek bailout, the second one. We had one last year in May 2010, $156 billion. Now, if new austerity measures, a 5-year plan is signed through by Greece's parliament next week, Tuesday to be precise, a second bailout, $170 billion, will be brought in. And we're discussing whether that will fix the Greek economy and whether you support the IMF and the eurozone continuing to help out Greece. Let me pull up a message we saw from John Azopardi, who posted on the Times of Malta's website. He says, why are we wasting our money on Greece if they don't want to do anything to solve their problems? Maybe the default option is the best option so that someone can learn a lesson. Well, let's bring in Sean from The Independent. We've also got Craig, who's with us from Greece. He's been tweeting about this a great deal. And Jose joins us from Porto in Portugal. Craig, let me start with you, because this is coming up again and again and again from our viewers. Do you think that the Greeks should think about working harder, paying more tax before they look for outside assistance?
First of all, let's get rid of a few myths here. There are two myths here. The first myth is that Greeks don't work. Excuse me, according to OECD, Greek working week is second only to South Korea, meaning that your average Greek worker, especially the one in the private sector, works far more hours than, say, a German worker or a Dutch worker or an English worker. Secondly, the myth is that Greeks don't pay tax. The very rich don't pay tax. They've managed to send their money offshore. But lots of Greeks pay tax, not so much in income tax, but through indirect taxation, through VAT, through tax on utilities, through tax on property ownership. So there's a huge amount of taxation in Greece, which the poor cannot avoid, but the rich can. So I think that's a thing that we should remember. Yes, there's massive income tax evasion. On the other hand, there's massive taxation indirectly. You can see this on the 23% VAT.
Sean, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I mean, all the Greeks that I've met say the middle classes, as well as the elite in Greece, don't pay their taxes, and they never have pretty much. And joining the euro, as I say, enabled them to borrow as a result. The private sector workers and people in agriculture may well have extremely long working weeks, but the public sector standard working week is 37.5 hours, and under these proposals it will go up to 40 hours. Now these things and the early retirement rules that they've had in the past, and the fact that whatever it is, they have not paid their way. The Greek public sector has not paid its way. The Greek nation has not paid its way. They have been living beyond their means. They've been having a party on everyone else's expense, I'm afraid.
And Sean, as you're talking, I can hear Craig trying to come in. Let me interrupt you because he's on Skype, so it's tough for him to come in. There's a slight delay. Craig, you wanted to pick up on what Sean was saying.
Yes, you're talking about the working week, 37.5 hours, which is exactly the same, if I remember, as the French working week. So what makes Greece the bad boys in this particular scenario and the French not?
Well, the point is simply that France is nearer to paying its own way and living within its means than Greece has been for the last 10 years. Otherwise, Greece wouldn't have built up 150% now, 160% to be, of its GDP as national debt, one of the highest in the advanced world, and 8/10 of it or more
compared to 200% for Japan?
Is 200% in Japan, very, very high, but most of it is owed to other Japanese, and
so it's a matter of ownership, not the debt itself.
And they are able to finance it. Now, the Greek debt is 85% owned by foreigners, and the foreigners don't want to lend them any more money. That's the difference.
Well, that last statement is certainly true. The rest is very much debatable, as you can hear Sean and Craig disagreeing. Let's bring in Jose in Porto. Jose, I know that you worked as an academic at Berkeley University, but you're now living in Portugal. What's been your experience?
Well, ever since I returned to Portugal, I haven't been able to find any kind of job that would fill the same criteria of that I was previously taking in. It's been really tough.
That's a shame that's coming in and out. But I wonder, Sean, if you feel, we have so many viewers telling us this, that we should be treating this as a eurozone crisis, not a Greek crisis, because it's not just Greece which has its difficulties.
Well, that's absolutely right. And as I was saying, it's a world crisis, or it will be if it goes wrong. I mean, it's perfectly true the Greeks, everything I've said is true. I think the Greeks have been living beyond their means and they've got to adjust. But it's also true that Greece is too big to fail. They have us over a barrel, because if they do default, there'll be the most enormous credit crunch all over again in Europe. The American banks and insurers that insured the value of Greek government bonds, when they go down, if they go down, they will be affected by it. The banks will stop lending to each other, and then they will stop lending into the real economy, and we'll have another crisis of confidence and another slump.
And I suspect I'm going to jump in here because we're right up to the end of the programme here, but of course the long-term issues you're raising are ones which we'll return to on World Have Your Say, and all of you who have taken part, by all means, feel free to get in touch if you'd like to take part again. Thank you very much indeed for watching. We're going to carry on this conversation at bbcworldservice.com at 17 hours GMT. Speak to you very soon. Goodbye.